And good afternoon, everybody. It is again Friday. We missed you guys last week. I was actually off the grid. I went canoeing. And I mean, I was off the grid. No cell coverage, no nothing, no air conditioning. But I did have an HF radio with me, which was cool. JP, how are you?
Very good. Hello, y'all. I'm doing pretty fine. Enjoying this beautiful Friday here in Austin, Texas.
All right. And I want to introduce Dave, November X-Ray 6 Delta. And Dave works on our firmware on the PGXL amplifier. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we actually were talking about the fact we had him locked in a basement somewhere working on the firmware,
but I do it all in my garage. It's true. It's true. I basically commandeered the garage and turned it into my ham radio shack and engineering laboratory.
Yeah, we have a lot of people working in garages thanks to COVID.
Well, no, it's not because of that. It's because I live in California and the garage is fairly livable most of the year.
And does it have air conditioning?
It's going to. I ordered it just the other day, and one of my little projects is to start wiring up the power supply for it and so on.
Hi, Martin. How are you?
Hey, Martin. You just got a 6600
wire right here.
Is this one of these floor ones that
No, it's a mini split.
Right.
It's a mini split. It has a little component that's inside the room, and it has another component that's outside, and it's both heating and cooling. And the heating is actually more important to me than the cooling. I can tolerate the heat, and I've got a nice little fan and so on. But in the wintertime, it actually gets cold out here. And when my fingers start stiffening up, then my productivity goes down.
Right. And by the way, I interrupt you because I think, didn't I just work Hotel India 86 mic X-ray on 6 meters yesterday? So thank you for that. I think that was correct. And we have Dayton making their presence known. Hi, Ken.
You guys are spoiled. You can work Europe on 6 meters.
Not today. It was all around me. Dayton, 6 meters being the magic band, you get to work JAs. But 6 meters being the magic band, it's 200 miles, 100 miles away. Guys are working, and I'm hearing, crickets. And,
we had a terrific opening 3 or 4 days ago here on the West Coast. I was working New England all day long.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
I'm up to, I think I've got 44 or 45 states worked now.
Nice. So
I'm almost there.
And there's Connor. Connor's one of a group from the youth crowd and has been making a dent in the ionosphere. So Connor, thanks for everything. And we got more Dayton than DX today. Stu's on as well. So, Connor wants me to show his call sign in case you want to work him and hear him. So.
Whiskey 4 India, Papa Charlie.
Yep. Victor 51. And we get some good DX.
51.
Have you?
Yeah.
I keep meaning to look up my logbook. The call looks familiar, and I don't know why. I'm sure I've worked them before. So.
Oh, I don't know. I can look in my logbook and tell you.
Very good. So we're gonna chat a little bit about the amp and tell you what can tell you, and we'd like to tell you more, but we can't tell you everything. But JP, you've been selling a lot of amplifiers.
Yeah, I'm pre-ordering some amplifiers. They're going to be available for shipping by the 3rd week of July. That's going to be 2 weeks from now. So everybody that is on the waiting list for that, if you want to kind of skip the waiting list and secure your PGXL amplifier, feel free to give me a call or send me an email, and I'll get you set up with one. We're taking pre-orders, so you can be sure you're gonna get your amplifier in July. And basically that's it. Yeah, there's a lot of interest. Actually, I don't know if we mentioned it last week because we were off last week, so we didn't. There are very good reviews on eHam about the amplifier, so that enlightened my day.
Yep.
That is good. So I encourage people to go to eHam and search for the PGXL, and you're gonna have some very detailed reviews about the amplifier. Right. I have one myself, and Michael has one over there, and I'm loving it. For 6 meters, it's beautiful. 1,500 watts on 6 meters. That's kind of neat.
Well, I'm only allowed 750 in digital modes, and Dave told me I wasn't getting it hot enough, so I'll have to go back and work on that. The other thing is, if you're not familiar with the PGXL amplifier, it's not like any other amplifier. It's not like anything that I, growing up with, where as we would call it either a single or a double hole amplifier, depending on how many tubes you had in it. But this has the ability to support 2 radios simultaneously, full duplex SO2R type operation, and a whole bunch of things that are certainly different. We'll talk a little bit about more of that, and so it's pretty cool. When we get them, we actually, we don't quite try to break it, but we're working pretty hard, and the Alpha team works them pretty hard as well, and they've been pretty rock solid. Okay, JP. So before we break over to Dave, anything else you want to add on that?
No.
By the way, if you're interested. Webpage, phone the main number, hit number 1, it rings at JP's desk, or you can, I can even give out the extension, but it doesn't matter. Number 1's good enough, the result's the same. And you can email us at sales@flexradio.com or info@flexradio.com, and we both get those too.
That's right. You got that right.
And JP loves email.
I love it. Yeah.
How many did you come into on Monday morning? You told me.
On Monday,
you told me it was like 500,000, but I think you might have been exaggerating it.
I came in to 80 emails on my inbox, which it's super. It's a very big amount for me. I always try to keep my inbox on 10 emails at the most. Yeah.
And they all take time to answer. They're not like one-word answers, because we try to answer with detail.
Yeah.
And try to maybe anticipate your questions. And so you might ask a question like, I got one today, and which mic works on the Maestro? Well, that's actually a long answer, because it could be the all our mics are the same, but this person needed some more information, or didn't know if he had one already, and a cable, or maybe a $12 cable was all he needed, so that type of thing. Kenna is asking about T-shirts. If it's on the website, you can order a T-shirt. If it's not, then we're out. And I think I heard Don say our guy who prints our T-shirts is gone a little dark, so we're working on that. So probably not.
We should do a raffle online, on our streams for a T-shirt. We should do something like that.
Okay, when you get it all figured out, we'll do it.
Okay.
We'll talk about that.
Good.
Anyway. So Dave, welcome to the show. We go for about 20 minutes or so, sometimes a little longer. And by the way, look at this. That's right. I did see 6 was open, well over top of me into Central Europe yesterday. So
I missed it. I missed it.
I missed everything. I don't have the station yet. I just moved to a new house, so I need to start from scratch.
Yeah.
I'll have to put it up here on the second pan adapter and see if keep an eye on it, make sure.
And I'll let you know if I see it in your direction.
If it opens, then the radio interview is finished.
You're gone, right? Just click.
No, it's not open, not for us here on the West Coast.
So, Dave, so what got you into ham radio? How long have you been at it?
I have been licensed since 2013, which is not long at all for hams. I've been fiddling around with radios since I was in junior high school, which was an extremely long time ago. I remember someone brought me the guts of a shortwave radio that had probably come out of a great big console cabinet, but it was just the radio itself, just the chassis and so on. And I put all the parts together. I remember it had amazing big tubes in it and all this good stuff. And I plugged it all together, and amazingly it worked. And I think one of the first stations I received was HCJB. So,
oh yeah,
HCJB, the station in Peru or Ecuador.
Right.
Yeah, whatever. Anyway, and I was amazed. And when I was a kid, I built a whole lot of the Heathkit stuff, and I built a shortwave receiver and all of that. But the code kept me out of ham radio. I was just completely intimidated by the concept of learning the code. So I just left it alone. Then about 2 years before I retired, I started doing some home improvement projects around the place in preparation for retiring. And I had a lot of time to fill while I was painting and so on. And I used to, well, I knew about Leo Laporte's online stuff, and I was looking at some of that. And then I found Ham Nation. And so I started listening to Ham Nation, and I looked at those guys and I thought, well, I can do that. And then
Leo's done a great job, by the way. Leo's stuff is really good. I probably listened to the first, I don't know, 100, 400 episodes of Security Now.
That was, I came in somewhere around 250 or something like that. Yeah. And I started, watching Bob Heil and Gordon West and so on. And I thought, well, shoot, I can do that stuff. And then I investigated and discovered code wasn't part of the issue anymore. And so I thought, I need to make some plans for retirement. And so I went down and I bought the technician book and studied it up and aced the test. I think it was 30 out of 30 or whatever the number of questions were. They asked me, do you want to take the general right now? I said, no, I want to go study for it first. I want to know this stuff, not just pass the test. So I went and I got the general book and I studied it, and I don't know how I did on the test, but I got it. And then I figured out by then that that really, you need to be an extra. And so I went and I got the extra book and I studied up on that and I got the extra. But in between, I went off and I went, what did I do? I went to Hamfest somewhere, and Flex Radio was there. And I looked at it and I said, this is really cool. And so I talked to some guys, and it turned out I was talking to Tim. And as a software professional, I looked at it and I thought, oh my, this is what I have to have. And so I went out and I bought a 5000 and I set it up, and I started working ham radio in sideband on a 5000, and I started paying the antenna dues. You have to pay a lot of antenna dues. So I went out and I bought some commercial antennas and I put them up, and I began to learn about the compromises of commercial antennas. And I started studying up on antenna theory real hard. And little by little, I have built a 4 antenna farm here in my suburban yard. It is a big yard for California. I live on a cul-de-sac, and so the front yard is very, very small, but the backyard is big. But I've got a, let's see, what have I got? I've got a 6-meter 3-element dipole, or a 6-meter 3-element Yagi up there at about 35 feet. I've got a hex beam on the
Go
side.
Hex beam. Go Hex beam.
Which really is, the heavy lifter. It does a lot of hard work. And I've got a 30 and 40 meter vertical, which is a commercial antenna, and a 40 and 80 meter fan dipole. The fan dipole is partly supported on my neighbor's house.
That's
and
nice.
I pay him rent for the use of his chimney by going around and fixing stuff in his house. He's a commercial artist, and he doesn't know one end of a screwdriver from another. So I keep his house working and that's how I pay my rent for his chimney.
Perfect.
And so then, I didn't build the antenna farm first, but I started working my way up through Flex Radio models, and I bought a 6300, which at the time was a really big deal for me.
And great. I was the same thing. I got it the day it came out. It was like, it's got a LAN connector on it. I saw the writing on the wall.
I bought it directly from Lori at Dayton. And this is before Lori and I knew each other. And then a couple of years later, I went back and I bought a 6500. And I sold the 6300 to a guy in Canada, to a VE, or a VA.
VA or VE, could have been either.
Or VE, yes. Yep. I think it was a VE in Canada. And then when I bought the 6500, I sold the 6300. And then later on, when I started getting involved with the company, then I started moving up, and I'm running a 6600 on my desk here. My Radio Shack consists of a Maestro, a PGXL, and a 6600. And all the other equipment that is in here is equipment that I use for Flex Radio software development. And so it is not really an everyday use. that's pretty much my story. I'm sticking to it.
Cool. So Dave got involved with working with the firmware in the PGXL, and I think I first met him at one of the ham fests in California. I'd flown out, and you were going on a cruise the next day.
Yeah, it was probably. Oh, that's right. I remember that. Yes.
Yeah.
That was at Pacificon, which it's about 6 miles up the road from where I live. And yes, I remember that. You brought
over part of the booth.
I had some equipment that Steve needed for the booth, and so I brought the equipment up, and I met you in the lobby there at the hotel in San Ramon.
So here's what I did at that Pacificon. They had a station there on 20 meters, working people on Saturday. So I got a little quiet. So I pulled out my iPhone, logged into my station in Ontario, knew what frequency they were on, called the guy and worked him, and said, "Oh, by the way, I'm remote and I'm in Pacificon." I don't think he figured out what I meant. So anyway, that was over. I grabbed a Flex card, hand wrote a QSL card, and walked it over and delivered it to him. So that was pretty cool. He still was a stunned look at his face, but anyway, so since we said your phone number, JP, the phone's rung off the hook, hasn't it? So we're busy. But anyway, so Dave works on the firmware, and there's a fair bit of really unique firmware under the covers.
Well, let's be more specific here. I work on the firmware for the amplifier. For
the amplifier and the Windows program that goes with the amplifier.
Right? I actually don't work on that, not right now. But I have my hands full with the amplifier firmware.
Good. But let's talk a bit about the hardware, because this amplifier is different than others. This amplifier is different than other amplifiers in that you've never seen an amplifier that has the ability to have be operating and receiving on the other half at the same time. The SO2R module and the filter box that allows you to have this amazing isolation. I mean, we're talking 1500 watts. And you can be on 20 meters and transmitting and not hear it on 40 or 10 or whatever. And that's not a trivial feat, right? I've seen that. I've been I'm calling
Whoops! Something has happened.
Q on 6 meters or something at home, and I'll be listening to my 80 meter head on in the morning. Did I drop out there?
There was a brief pause.
Brief pause. So we have a big thunderstorm coming in here, so we'll have to get this done. But we also have something that called MEFA, which is called Maximum Efficiency Frequency Algorithm.
Yeah, I think it's just Maximum Efficiency Algorithm. But,
oh, that's right. And Travis has bought most of everything, and I use it all the time, and so this is firmware that is in the amplifier. This is now developed by 403A, as you were saying earlier. So we're not part of fine-tuning that yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. So so that's pretty cool. That means I drive. Well, tell me about it, Dave. I use a bit more power to drive the amp.
Actually, you can probably do just as good a job, but I'll tell you what I know. I haven't. I frankly
well,
have not studied. Well, I frankly have not studied the code. I don't know exactly what's going on here, but I can tell you what I know. I know that the amplifier is watching the drive signal and watching the magnitude of the drive signal. And when it's in normal operation mode, the drive signal goes through a series of attenuators to get it down to a certain level, and then it goes into the main transistors and gets amplified, and out it goes. The amplifier firmware provides various voltage levels for the transistors, and that means that it provides various power levels. When it's running in AAB mode, basically almost Class A mode, it's running, I think, 52 volts out to the transistors, and the transistors are way up in the middle of their conduction band, which gives you good Class A type performance at the expense of a lot of heat, because the transistors are conducting all of the time, and so that's the way that works in that mode. If the amplifier is running in Class AB mode, then the voltage comes down into the 40s somewhere and becomes more adaptive. It starts looking at the at the drive level and so on. What MEFA is trying to do is to carry that one step farther and basically to reduce the voltage to the lowest voltage that will work. I think that's what it's trying to do, and reduce the heating in the amplifier at the expense of needing to give it more drive. But I think the expectation is that, you're probably only giving it about 50% of your exciter anyway, and so you can give it more drive and everybody will be fine, and you get less heating and all that sort of thing. But it's not for sideband. Sideband, you want to run the amplifier in AAB mode.
Right. I've seen on FT8 on 6 even today. Now we're having a heat wave here north of Toronto, and mine,
what is it, 60 degrees?
No, mid-90s actually.
Oh no!
Not like Sacramento, but my amplifier's in a case for the winter, and I have probes around it, and I can see that the air temperature around is about 32 Celsius, which is 90. And I was running some 6 meter stuff this morning, trying to finish a QSO into England on FT8, and it's pounding away. And I was telling Dave that as hot as the reporting from the PA probe I saw was 46 degrees Celsius. And you thought was pretty good.
I think that's remarkable, but we'll talk about that another time.
So we're pretty.
The amplifier is basically built around 2 very high performance RF amplifier transistors. I don't actually know a great deal about the transistors other than they consume a lot of power, and they are bolted directly to a very large monolithic billet cut aluminum heat sink. It's actually billet cut. The thing starts with a block of aluminum, and it goes through I suppose it goes through a CNC machine, and they mill the fins out of the solid block. The heat sink has a tremendous capacity for storing heat. And then there are 3 fans that blow on that heat sink. 2 fans blow directly on the fins. 1 fan blows directly on the top of the heat sink. And there is a temperature probe attached to the heat sink. And then the firmware monitors this temperature probe about 8 or 10 times a second, and applies a cooling algorithm or a fan algorithm, which is basically trying to keep the heat from building up too much. So when you run the amplifier, you'll see, if you're going from, say, idle to full power, you'll see the temperature come up rather quickly as the heat sink begins to soak. The fan speed follows it all as it goes on up, and at some point, if you put the key down and just hold it there, the temperature will eventually max out, the fan speed will eventually max out. And if you keep the key down and you say, okay, I'm going to break this thing, then what happens is the amplifier firmware then begins to roll back the drive voltage on the transistors and pull the power down to keep it below the maximum max temperature. The max temperature is 80 Celsius, so that is blistering.
Wow.
Hot. Now that is well below the max temperature that the manufacturer specs for the transistors. So we've got a lot of thermal overhead. We've got a long way to go before we would get into any serious trouble with the transistors.
That's amazing.
And then there's a bunch of other stuff in the firmware that does the same kind of thing. So we're watching temperature, we're watching voltages, and we're watching SWR. And so being a transistor amplifier, it cannot tolerate as high an SWR as a tube type amplifier can. I have an ACOM 600 watt amplifier sitting over here in a box, and you can,
because you're not using it anymore.
No, because I'm not using it anymore, right? But when I had antennas that were less well tuned, I could tune those antennas directly with the amplifier using the Pi network at the back of the amp, and that's fine, and the tube can withstand an awful lot of reflected power.
Right.
But transistor amplifiers
becomes part of the tuned circuit into the antenna too.
Right.
Yeah.
But transistor amplifiers cannot do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we watch SWR very, very carefully, and we watch it at a very high speed. And we have a hardware device in the amplifier which is watching the reflected power level, in effect the SWR level, on the output of the transistors. And it operates at hardware speeds. And if it sees the SWR go above a programmed threshold, it'll pull the plug on the amp to save the transistors, because the power can reflect very quickly.
Renko's got a video with the screwdriver, right? Somewhere on YouTube.
Could be. I have no idea.
So he puts a T connector in the feed line into a dummy load, so that exposes the both conductors, and he puts the brick on the key type of thing at full power. And he takes a screwdriver and shorts it.
Yeah.
And it trips in microseconds.
Microseconds. Yeah, it trips in microseconds. Right. So initially that can seem like an annoyance, but you're protecting the transistors, and you work with tuners, you work with antenna tuning and so on. This isn't going to happen until you get up to about an SWR of 3. So you already have to be in pretty bad territory. We'll run without any fold back up to an SWR of 2. And then from 2 to 3, we start folding back, and at 3, we start tripping.
Yeah.
That's the way it works. Let's see.
Now we're good at tripping. Now in the early days, I'll sort of let the cat out of the bag. In the early days, we were probably tripping a little too early, so that took some work.
We had some difficulty getting all these parts to work exactly the way we wanted them, but we've got it now. We've got it now, and it is working exactly the way. And believe me, I have tripped my amp thousands of times here. And I know exactly when it trips and under what circumstances and so on. And we've debugged a lot of bugs, and it is now working exactly the way we wanted it to work. The other thing I was going to mention was the harmonic load. You probably would like to talk.
I was going right into. I wanted to say something. I was not going to post this, but I'll put this up because, as a moderator, when you see these statements, they're really cool, but there's always a portion of the crowd that'll turn it into a bad thing. But I think this is worth posting anyway from Travis. Because I know the question is, well, how come there was no failsafe? But you've got your screen covered. But Travis said he got locked up, and he ended up with a 3-hour transmission, putting out over 1 kilowatt, and had no issues, and came home and just turned it off, right, or something to that effect.
Oh, so, yeah. Well, let's see, there was some software locked up, and I had over a 3-hour transmission.
Right. By the way, Travis, there is a timeout. There is a timeout timer in Smart FDR.
There is a timeout in it now. Yes, there may not have been at that time, but there is a timeout now. And at some point, then when the timeout occurs, then the amp's solution to this kind of thing basically is to turn its internal power supply off. And so that removes the biasing from the transistors. The transistors just turn into nothing, and the amp will sit there, and the fans will run, and it will cool it. But you can, as far as I know, you can run it at full power as long as you want, as long as the temperature is stable.
Travis says yes. It's now set correctly.
Yeah,
but we've all been there. I've done it. I've sat on microphones and FM radios. I had an FM radio in the car one day for 3.5 hours. Wow, the repeater's really quiet.
Yeah, it's because it hates you.
Yeah, until I drove out of range. Yeah, and I did hear about that, so they figured out it was me. Harmonic load. No other amplifier's got the harmonic load.
Right. The idea is very simple. Typically, if I understand it correctly, I'm hedging this a little bit because my understanding may not be all that good.
I'll catch it for you. I think I got it.
But typically, what an amplifier will do is run the amplified signal through a low-pass filter to take out the harmonics. And typically, then what happens is the harmonic power, my understanding is, will typically bounce back into the amplifier.
Yes, because it sees a high SWR, so it's reflected on your antenna as well.
Yes.
So if you have a 7 megahertz signal, and we amplify that, we also end up with a 14 megahertz. That's the first term, you get the idea, and then 28 and all the way up. And all that energy has to go somewhere.
It has to go somewhere, right? You can't. I mean, you do what you can in the design of the amplifier to keep it from generating harmonics, but it's going to. That's reality.
Yeah.
And so now we're not allowed to transmit the harmonics, of course, and so we've got to kill them somewhere. Well, what this amplifier does, and in some sense I'm reverse engineering this because I'm not the hardware guy on this, and I don't know for sure exactly how this works. But my understanding of what goes on here is that the output signal basically goes through a high-pass and a low-pass filter, and a high-pass filter is pulling the harmonics out and then dumping them into a dummy load. There is what is about a 50 watt,
400 actually. 400 watt dummy load.
Is it 400 watts?
400 watt dummy load.
It's a relatively small resistor bolted to a big heat sink that has a fan on it, and it just dumps that harmonic data, that harmonic signal, into that dummy load and turns it into heat. And so it doesn't come back to the transistors. It doesn't lower the point at which which we would have to trip, and the signal doesn't mix into the output signal and doesn't get reflected back into the transistors and all that stuff.
Gives us a better IMD rater.
Which gives us a better IMD, right? I was just thinking IMD, right? So the amplifier firmware runs the fan on the harmonic load, and it generally can run that fan at a very low rate. There's a thermistor on the harmonic load. It keeps track of that temperature, but that fan also cools all of the filter elements, all of the low pass, high pass filter elements. And so that fan is also, the fan speed is also controlled by the overall power level of the amplifier, so that we keep enough air going through that filter unit to make sure it stays nice and cool. And it's working. It's working great. As far as I can tell, it is.
No,
I tried hard to burn it up. I've burned up 3 amps doing this.
In the earlier firmware days.
In the early firmware. 1 amp I burned up. I was testing something in the firmware, and I deliberately turned off all the safeties.
Oh.
I bet you John liked you for that one.
Yeah, it lasted about 5 seconds.
Yeah. So John Patterson does all our hardware on our amplifiers, and we've had John on. We had him on, but we had him on one of the videos about the amplifier. There's one on our YouTube channel where we talk. So John's on about that. So the other thing that is really cool about this amplifier, not only does it work with FlexRadio's, but it also can receive band data from Kenwood Cat data, BCD data from Yaesu radios, CIV data from ICOM, or no data.
Pin to band.
Yep, pin to band.
It has a multi-pin connector on the back. It has 2 connectors on the back. I'm trying to remember what the back looks like. It has 2 connectors on the back. One of them is an RS-232 connector, so it will take CAT data from any radio that sends CAT commands. The other is a 15-pin 15-pin connector.
BCD one. Yep. That's the BCD one.
That one 4 of the pins are for BCD, and the remainder of the pins are pin to band.
Right.
So if you put a 5-volt signal on one of those pins, the amplifier will read that as a request to switch to that particular band. And then the amp firmware reads all of this stuff, all these hardware inputs, and then also including the LAN input, if there is one from the Flex Radio, and puts them into an order and makes the band selection based on that.
Right.
And then,
by the way,
it also has a hardware keying input, of course. So if you have a radio that isn't a Flex Radio, but it outputs, say, BCD and a keying output, then you wire that up and away you go.
Right. And hooking up to a Flex Radio is a matter of putting up 1 or 2 RF cables and 1 LAN connector into your switch or the radio or whatever, but it just finds it and it works. There's a bit of pairing that has to happen, like a Bluetooth headset. So you do require a Windows PC to do that, because you do actually have to bring up the app and tell it which radio to connect to.
Yeah, actually, which are the inputs and how to decode them.
And that's true too. So there's a bit of configuration. It's reasonably straightforward.
So, for instance, if you have an ICOM and you're using the CIV. CIV, right?
Yep.
If you have an ICOM and you're using the CIV, then you have to tell the amp which CIV address the radio is sending from.
Right. And
so
you can also
listen on that address, and it will decode the data that comes across the line in the form that is associated with that address.
And by the way, you can split its personality too. You could use half the amplifier on a Flex 6300, 6400, 6500, and hook up your Kenwood, L-Craft, Yaesu, whatever on the other side.
Each half runs independently.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And nobody else does that. And it's a self-contained unit. I believe there's still some debate over this. It's 43 pounds.
Yeah, there's a shipping weight and there's an actual weight, and I think the shipping weight's the 43 pounds.
The shipping is 37 without
I think
the box.
the amplifier is 37.
Yeah, and you can carry it by its handle. It comes with a power cable. You have to put your own connector on. And it runs on 120. Notice, Dave, I didn't say 110.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the 120
thing.
here in a second, okay?
Yeah, so it'll run on
right now.
110 through to 250 volts. It's self-switching.
Yeah.
Put the right connector on, and low voltage. The 120 type voltage. It runs at no, Connor, I'm not doing wireless coax. Nice try. It's called RF. And it'll run half power, right?
About half power, yeah. I'm just finishing up the work on the 120. The amplifier has a commercial grade power supply in it. This is a power supply that is used in cell towers. It's used in computer farms, all that sort of thing. So this is a very low noise RF, very high power supply, and it puts out up to about 60 volts at up to about 60 amps or something like that, in that range. For input, it will take any AC above 80 volts up to about 300, but it is derated below 180 volts.
Right.
So if you're running, say, at 220 or 240 or whatever you like to think of AC, then the power supply is running at full power, and you can then run the amplifier at full power. If you're running below 180 AC, then the power supply derates down a linear line down to 80 volts. And so now what the amplifier is now doing is derating its own performance accordingly. Mm-hmm. as the power supply power goes down, as the voltage goes down. So I am running the amplifier right now, the one on my desk, I'm running on 120 AC. And under those conditions, then the amp puts out different amounts of power on different bands. We're still calibrating that, but I've got the foldback level set to 700 watts. So if it gets above 700 watts, then the amp starts folding back. But the more important thing here is that the amplifier watches the power supply, which is a device inside the amplifier that it can communicate with. And it's watching the alarm flags on the power supply. And if it sees an alarm flag come on indicating that the power supply is being overtaxed because of its low supply voltage, then the amplifier will dump itself to keep from damaging the power supply and to keep from damaging the amplifier. And this is a very clear indication that you're driving it a little bit too hard, and you turn the power level down a little bit and key up again, and away you go.
Away you go.
Yeah, I ran FT8s all this last week on 120 volts.
Nice. Yeah, I think Tim does the same thing with his. We do pretty well. Everybody does this, but we want to make sure that the amplifier is protected from us, the user, or inadvertent things, or 3 o'clock in the morning mistakes, and so it's done a great job. Most of the equipment does today too. Because repairs are expensive for everybody. They're expensive for us, they're expensive for you, the user, as well. So we hate doing them. Not that we hate doing repairs, but you're without your radio, and they take time and effort and stuff. So that's good. Well, Dave, that's great. Is there anything else you wanted to mention on your toy?
I think that pretty much does it. We keep working on it. It's improving daily, and it's a real amplifier. It is really
Yeah, I'm going to get Craig K9CT on to talk about it and the stuff he's doing with it. It's pretty cool. He runs full SO2R, 1 radio, 1 amplifier, 2 operators, 1 person. He's done just about every combination of things you can do, and so that's cool.
Craig comes up with good suggestions from time to time about how we can improve the product as we go along. So listen carefully to what he has to say.
Craig's got a little YouTube video that I started to watch, and I was sort of blown away about how he built his station. I might get him on for next week if I can. And a wonderful guy. If you ever get a chance to meet K9CT. Anyway, JP, anything to close?
No. Remember, sales@flexradio.com if you want to pre-order your amplifier after this great presentation that
we're selling them as fast as we can build them, is what I understand.
We are literally selling them as fast as we can build them and ship them. They are built originally. They're built in Montenegro, and they have to come over. And the shipping due to COVID has been a bit of a challenge. And I've got a couple of comments here. They're coming in Europe. It's a little more complicated than just shipping them, so that will be coming. Pre-adaptive distortion, we could spend a whole episode on pre-adaptive distortion. The amplifier does support it.
The amplifier provides the raw data.
It
provides a 60 dB down, minus 60 dB signal on a BNC connector on the back, which then would be fed back into a radio, into an exciter, and used to generate pre-adaptive distortion.
Yep. So
so
that part of that capability is there, and that's quite a discussion too. So, well, everybody, thanks very much, JP. Looks like you got a few voicemails.
It's like a normal day at Flex.
Like the phone, I know. I've grabbed a few too, so the phone's been ringing off the hook. We found, and I keep saying this, that with with COVID, unfortunately, I guess, we have seen a lot of people upgrading their shack. They've been at home a little bit more, and then they've started to blow the dust off something, and getting back on the air. And the bands reflect that as well. And I've had a couple of other friends in like hobby-like businesses like that are run similar things, not related to ham radio. I'm a cyclist as well, and that's another one. These guys can't keep bikes in stock, and a few other things. So, but hope everybody's safe and doing well, and pay attention to your government. I know we don't like to listen to government some days, but we got to follow on, and I think most of them are doing the right thing. We're pretty fortunate up here in the Great White North. We've been really good, but nobody's going outside or going very far. So we've really been limiting our social interactions as well. So it's been good. So 73 all. Dave, thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
JP, have a good day. Good weekend.
Too. Enjoy the weekend. There's a contest. Remember, Michael, this
I didn't look at the contest calendar. Is it the VHF contest?
No, it's
13 colonies? No,
there's another one.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, we'll have to go look it up. Just look at the contest calendar.
By the way, Mike, I looked you up in my logbook. I worked you in 2017 in a sideband contest.
Really?
Yeah, it's the only time.
I'm going to go look.
What does it say? It was on March 26, 2017 at 2040 UTC, and it was on 20 meters.
Yep. Connor says it's the IARU contest. So
that one. Exactly. That one.
Right. Yeah. Okay, 73, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Take care. Enjoy.
Cheers. Bye-bye. And here's the part where I have to hit end broadcast twice. Oh, it's not even answering me this time. Here we go. 73.